right. Well, welcome to the City Commission meeting for May 13th, and we will call the meeting together. Jen, would you take roll, please?
Commissioner Gelser?
Here.
Commissioner Erickson?
Here.
Commissioner Waldner?
Here.
Commissioner Abraham?
Here.
Mayor Lindsay?
Here. And that's a new title. So, we do have a quorum, so we will look to approval of the minutes from the May 6th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve? Any items that are, need corrections or additions?
I'll move the approval of the May 6th meeting minutes. Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Move to approve the May 13th agenda, and before we do that, we do have some guests here that are number 4 on the new business list, and if that's possible, we'd like to move that up to expedite their time getting back to Sioux Falls and home. Is there any objections to that?
No problem. You
All
want
right.
to approve the agenda as amended and just take that out of order, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
I'll move the approval of the agenda as presented with the understanding that new business number 4 can be moved to the top of the agenda.
very good.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, appearances. John Marco is the first one on the list here. John, would you like to address the council?
Sure will. I'm asking for approval of the Isaac Walton Carnival again this year up on the city Armory parking lot. Van Epson first also, blocked off as usual.
Mhm.
And that is for the 6th, 7th, and 8th of June.
Okay,
Pretty much the same thing as we've had last year, years, past.
Every other year.
You talked to Chuck? Have you talked to Chuck,
No,
John?
I haven't.
Okay,
I can't.
you will do that, probably,
Mhm.
good idea.
Sure, get the roadblocks up.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
And I'm sure Fred will help with that.
Okay.
Actually, if you stop on out, this will be the form, we'll just get everybody coordinated on it, we'll have
Okay.
it for file at that point, so we can get it back to you pretty quick.
Okay, I can try to stop out tomorrow.
Sounds good.
okay, do we need a motion to approve this?
I
Entertain
will
a motion.
move to approve or authorize the closing of Van Epps and First Streets and the city parking lot for June 6th, 7th, and 8th for the purpose of the Isaac Walton Carnival.
Second.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, those opposed? Okay, motion carries.
All right. thank you
Very
much.
good,
You
yes.
bet, John.
Hopefully in that it's good weather and not pouring
Yeah.
down rain.
Yes, I do too. Well, we need the rain though.
We do need the rain, but we can pick a couple other days.
Pardon?
Some money for us, guys.
Okay, at this time, Troy Larson is here from the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System, and we're excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and welcome aboard.
Thank you.
You were visiting earlier, you have some big shoes to fill, and I'm sure you do a great job.
Well, it's a definite learning curve, but I'm enjoying it.
Well, and I apologize in advance, I'm not gonna be nearly as quick as that gentleman. If all your business was that quick, I'm sure it'd be nice.
So-
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here and provide an update on the project. Want to introduce Dan Zolkowski, our construction administrator, is with me as well this evening. And Dave Odens is our engineer, and yours as well, so we share an engineer. The presentation you already have in front of you, I'm just gonna go through the high points, and I wanna make this very informal, so by all means, please stop and ask questions. I'll preface it by saying the main thing I'd like to do tonight is get input from you as to when you feel you need water. That's really gonna drive this discussion is how bad you want the water, how bad you need it, and what you're willing to do to make that happen. Lewis and Clark, just to bring everyone up to speed, is currently 65% complete. 11 members began receiving water on the 30th of July 2012, so that's the exciting news. State and local members have paid 100% of the non-federal cost share, which is close to $154 million. Because of the prepayment, the remaining construction schedule is entirely dependent upon federal funding because we've already used all the non-federal dollars that were prepaid. Right now, there are 6 remaining Bureau Reclamation water projects, and those 6 have a remaining federal cost share of over $1.2 billion. but unfortunately, only 22 million is proposed by the president in the FY14 budget for construction. That 22 million is a decrease of 29 million from last year. And, you don't need to be a math teacher to see that the numbers just don't add up there when you, especially when you consider inflation each year on the remaining federal cost share. So funding is not even close to even covering inflation, let alone make any meaningful construction projects. So currently, all the projects are on a path to infinity, not just Lewis and Clark. In the 2014 budget is 3.2 million for Lewis and Clark. That's down from 4.5 million last year and 5.5 million the year before. And just to give it a historical comparison, we were receiving in the mid-20s million in terms of funding for FY 08 and 9, and even before that, plus stimulus money. So we were doing reasonably well on our funding until as of late. Average inflation on Lewis and Clark's remaining federal cost share is about $8 million a year. Roughly, the federal government owes, we expect to hear later this month that the new ceiling is roughly $207 million. It was as low as $194 million a couple of years ago, but again, the federal money that they're paying is not even keeping up with inflation. So right now, we're going in the reverse direction in terms of the remaining balance on the federal principal.
Troy, if I could add just for a minute, just for everybody's knowledge, this project was approved in '93.
It was authorized in 2000.
2000, that's when you started the process. But indexing is provided each year, and so it's not just the cap that was authorized in 2000. It goes up by the rate of indexing every year. So that's what, I think, that's what Troy is alluding to is inflation. I mean, we're going in the wrong direction there. So.
Much like if you had a loan at the bank and you went in the beginning of the year, and then at the end of the year, you find out despite your payments, you owe more than you started. That's essentially where we're at. We had reason to believe that our funding would actually be increased this year, which in hindsight turned out to be quite foolish, but we had good reason to believe we would, and that is because we worked very hard, harder than we ever had with our congressional delegation. There were a series of meetings hosted by the congressional delegation with the administration, Bureau of Reclamation, Office of Management and Budget, Department of Interior, to try to convince them to increase funding, as well as the fact that the Mini-Wachoni Water Project in western South Dakota received their last funding in the FY13 budget. And that freed up $23 million. And Bureau of Reclamation had been telling us that they were focusing on the Mini-Wachoni project to get that off the plate so that then they could help these other projects. So that was always the goal, is to get that project off the table. Well, what they ended up doing is taking the 23 million plus another 6 million out of the rural water program. So in hindsight, it did absolutely no good for any of the projects to have Mini-Wachoni off the table. So the administration is clearly, in our opinion, not making Lewis and Clark a priority, and we believe the numbers bear that out. And it's not just the administration's fault. The earmark ban, which wrongly includes authorized projects, prevents Congress from increasing funding for Lewis and Clark specifically. Congress can increase funding for the rural water program as a whole, and then hope that it trickles down to Lewis and Clark, kind of trickle down appropriations. But only if they actually pass a budget. This past year, they passed a continuing resolution for the whole year, so they were not able to increase funding for the program as a whole. There's seemingly strong congressional support to exclude authorized projects from the earmark ban, but this past November, the ban was unfortunately extended for another 2 years, meaning it will be 3 years before the effect is felt if the ban is changed, because you have the 2 years that's in effect, and then if they change it, it'll be a full year before we see any increase in funding. We're not making a comment about the earmark ban as a whole. We're simply stating we don't believe the earmark ban should include authorized projects that have been fully vetted. And just a little bit of historical background, it took Lewis and Clark 10 years to get authorized, so we went through countless hearings and were fully vetted before being authorized. No indication that the earmark ban will even be changed in 2 years. There is a bill in Congress that was reintroduced by Senator Baucus. It's called the Rural Water Projects Completion Act, and the bill would provide $80 million a year in mandatory funding. Instead of discretionary funding, it'd be mandatory funding for the 6 Bureau of Reclamation projects until they are completed. The funding would be in addition to any funding received through the budget process. The funding needs to be offset, so it does not add to the debt. Then when the projects are completed, this funding would sunset. So it's not a new program, it's simply a focused funding approach to get these projects completed in somewhat of a reasonable manner. Although this hearing that was recently held, the question was asked of the Bureau of Reclamation representative that if this were approved, the $80 million a year, when do they estimate these 6 projects would be completed? And the answer was 2039. So while this is an improvement over what we've seen lately, no one should think this is some kind of silver bullet where it's a windfall of money. There is bipartisan co-sponsorship of this bill, including Senator Hoeven, a Republican from North Dakota. Unfortunately, we've been unable at this time to convince Senator Thune and Senator Grassley to co-sponsor the bill, and we continue to urge them to do so. Even if they co-sponsor it, the bill is a long shot. The Bureau of Reclamation supports it, but the Office of Management, Budget, the purse strings of the administration, they don't like the idea of turning something into mandatory funding. They don't like being handcuffed in that regard. So there's certainly some opposition to it. So that's kind of a lay of the land of where we're at, or where we stand. And the next part of my presentation is what now. But before I go into what now, any questions about where we stand?
These 6 projects, are the 5 other ones slowing us down? Slowing down Lewis and Clark? In other words, is it to our advantage to be kind of under that same umbrella with all 6? And maybe there's power in all 6, you know?
To a certain degree there is. We're working on some joint letters to try to, with one voice, try to increase our, the noise that we can make.
Yep.
The other, out of the 6 projects, 2 are non-tribal projects, us and 1 other. So the other 4 are tribal in nature, and they tend to do better in the funding because of that. But even so, they're in the same boat we are in terms of infinity. So, I don't know. I guess I don't know how to answer that. Regardless though, we're stuck with it.
We're still without it.
And, there's no way we get pulled out, because if this bill passes, it would impact all the projects, but. Good question.
One other quick question I have is that we have 11 members that began receiving water. How many total members are there?
20.
20, okay. I think I knew that, or was told it, but couldn't remember.
So Madison's the only one left in South Dakota. Then there are 4 in Minnesota and 4 left in Iowa. 1 Iowan is receiving water. So out of the 11 receiving water, 10 are in South Dakota, 1 is in Iowa, Rock Rapids. So then you got 4 more in Iowa, 4 in Minnesota, and 1 in Madison.
Is Sheldon as far as you go east into Iowa?
Sheldon and Worthington, if you look on a map, are both
But,
about
yeah,
furthest
for
east.
Iowa's, that'd be.
Yeah, for Iowa it would be.
Yeah, it'd be about north and south,
Yeah.
about the same.
And one thing to note too, out of those 11 members that are connected, Minnehaha Community Water Corp has 3 connections, and they currently only have 1 connection out of 3. So in addition to the 9 members, they still need 2 more connection points. Good question. Anything else in terms of where we stand before we go to what now?
Senator Baucus better hurry, he's retiring.
Yes, well, and that's true. He's retiring, and Senator Johnson, of course, and Senator Harkin. So this probably is if we're gonna pursue this, and this will get into part of our discussion, if we're gonna try to do something legislatively, it really has to be this year, or potentially next year before they retire. But this has to be a big push, because we're gonna lose a lot of clout.
I assume Mr. Baucus has a couple in Montana that he's,
Yes. The project, the states impacted, in addition to our 3-state area, there's North Dakota, Montana, and New Mexico. Those are the only states that have these water projects. Any other questions? Those are good. So what now? Up until now, the Lewis and Clark Board has taken a wait-and-see approach to our funding. We didn't want to have a knee-jerk reaction that you get 1 or 2 bad years of funding and suddenly panic. And so we have held tight and wanted to kind of see how things played out. Well, we know now kind of what the lay of the land's going to be from here on out, unless something totally unexpected were to happen, such as maybe another stimulus bill. But clearly, the administration's not making the project a priority. Rural water as a whole, not just Lewis and Clark, but the whole rural water program. And clearly, we're not gaining any traction with trying to get the earmark ban changed. So the members of Lewis and Clark have had 3 long-range planning discussions so far, and has a 4th plan for May 23rd. And please refer to copies of the previous 3 presentations for a lot of facts and figures that have been shared, and I believe Chad indicated you've at least got 2 of those, and certainly get the 3rd one. So far, no final decisions have been made, and no timeline has even been set for making any decisions, although the consensus is if we're gonna do something, it has to be this year because of the reasons we discussed with the retirements. The 11 connected members are paying an estimated 50 cents more per 1,000 gallons for Lewis and Clark than if all the members were connected. So the connected members do have skin in the game, but they are understandably content to just wait indefinitely compared to the cost of borrowing a significant amount of money. But right now, there's no decision for the connected members to even make because we need to get the non-connected members to reach some kind of consensus of how they would even like to proceed before we take a proposal to the whole board. And to put that 50 cents into perspective, for Sioux Falls, that's a little over $500,000 a year. For some of the other communities, it's obviously not quite as high. You might be in the $50,000, $60,000 range, but it's a chunk of change. Although the entire board will make the final decision, obviously a lot will depend on how the non-connected members want to proceed. So there are 2 main options for the non-connected members. One is to take steps to address your short-term water needs, and when I say short-term, I'm referring to 10+ years. So a lot of people would consider that long-term, but for us that would be considered short-term. And then view Lewis and Clark as a long-term investment, meaning you just let the money ride, is there anything you're not able to do that you could do if you had the money back, which in Madison's case is just under $2 million. If there's not, then you can just continue to be a member of Lewis and Clark, but take steps to address your short-term water needs so that you can essentially buy time. And some of the members have done that. They've invested money that they did not plan to. This is money that the members are spending on top of what they already have spent for Lewis and Clark. So it's really adding salt to the wound if a member has to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, or in some members' cases, millions of dollars. One member in Minnesota has spent $6 million on a connection that they did not plan to do. So that's step 1, is buy time and just address your water needs as best you can. Number 2 is to pay more money than you already have to control when water will be delivered. And this would be the connected members as well, assuming they would agree to it, not just the non-connected members, but essentially asking the membership to pay more, and potentially asking the states involved to pay more. Glad Scott's here. If the government's gonna break their promise, does that impact the states as well as the members? While not a realistic option at this time, a 3rd option potentially in the future could be abandonment, meaning we simply throw up our hands and we say, sorry, we're not gonna be able to get to Madison as we had hoped, in which case Madison would get their money back. The good news out of these long-range discussions is no one is favoring abandonment. It's too early, and we really want to do what we can to make sure the project's completed. Now, another few years, if we decide to just wait, for a few more years, then we might have to revisit that and find out, does everyone still want to wait and see? Because wait and see means, when you say wait and see, that almost gives an impression that you think there might be a change. Well, we shouldn't go into wait and see thinking that anything's gonna change. really just deciding if we're gonna take matters into our own hands, spend money to address our short-term water needs, and then review it 3 years from now, is essentially what that means.
Troy, I was
Yeah.
wondering if you might be able to just take a small period of time here and just explain, not in great detail, but just the ARCA. You know, we try to do these updates about every year or so, but I don't think you've been here since, one commissioner, Commissioner Waldner has been on, and of course Roy, Mayor Lindsay, was just on. Maybe just touch on the ARCA and, again, no details, but how it was and how that ARCA is in place, and I don't want you to necessarily get into the details of how this is affecting
Sure,
these
maybe
discussions.
just, there's a document that was called the commitment agreement, and that was signed back in 93, Dave, was that the first one? And then there's the amended one, but the first one, I think, was 93. And that kind of just bound the members together. Well, it was clear that that document needed a lot more detail, and so there was a long process back in 2007, 2006, and we created what's called the ARCA, which is an acronym for Amended and Restated Commitment Agreement, so essentially a revised agreement that binds the members together and says what we can do and can't do. It has a lot more detail on how you set water rates, how do you handle it if some member wants out. Bill Heyer had included a provision in there, or wanted a provision in there about abandonment. If for some reason the project never got to Madison, that Madison would get their money back. So that provision's in there because of Bill Heyer, and there's other things. But essentially, it's the governing document of how the system operates, particularly with regard to construction. There's certain things that don't apply once we're completed. For example, right now, we cannot use water revenues to do any construction because we'd be asking the members that are connected to finance construction, when all members should share in that cost. When we're fully built out, whenever that may be, that goes away, and obviously you can then use water sales to generate revenue to do construction if you wanted to expand the system or something like that. So that's just broad terms, it's about a 25-page document that's kind of our constitution, if you will.
And each and every council and board of each member had to approve that, and so it's a contract essentially between each member. So, thank you, I thought that
Yep.
might help, so, okay, thank you.
So the long-term investment, I kind of touched on this already. What does that mean? It just means letting your money ride. And if there's nothing you can't do with that $2 million, because you don't have that $2 million, then that's an option. All you're losing is the interest you get in the bank, at the bank, which right now isn't a whole lot of money. And then you could decide 10 years from now, or 4 years, 5 years, at some point you could decide, you know what, we don't want to wait anymore, just give us our money back. And that's a decision for the full board to make, but if we're not making any progress, I can't see any reason the board would say, no, Madison, you can't have your money back. So I don't want to make it sound like you can arbitrarily decide to get out, but on the other hand, from a practical standpoint, the situation we're in, is there any reason the board would force Madison to stay? In my opinion, just my opinion, I see no reason. We want to do everything we can to convince you to stay, but, I just didn't want you to feel you're in some kind of marriage that you absolutely cannot get out of if for some reason you wanted to. I understand Madison is spending close to $250,000 this summer to address water quality issues that is related to the delay with Lewis and Clark, that if you had Lewis and Clark water, you would not have to spend that money. I understand there's this phase 2 that's on hold, that you might need to spend money on that if you were to wait 10 years or so. So those are some expenses that you'd have to keep in mind as you're deciding that. The second option then, essentially coming up with more money, it really comes down to how much money the members are willing to pay for a more definitive water delivery schedule. The remaining federal cost share is $200 million. I indicated later this month we expect to hear that that's now about $207 million. About 160, these are rough numbers, but about 160 million is needed to provide all 20 members with at least some of their reserve capacity. The other 40 million roughly would be to develop wells and expand the treatment plant to get everyone their full capacity. So one of the things we're looking at is just focusing on the 160 to at least get some of the members, or all the members, some water. That amount could further be reduced in terms of the amount we borrow if we did some creative construction. For example, we could potentially, and I understand you've talked about it amongst yourselves, is we could possibly sell water to MCWC, who in turn sells water to Big Sioux Rural Water, who in turn sells it to Madison, essentially using what I call the bucket brigade to get water to Madison. According to some rough estimates by the engineers, that could save roughly $10 million. You would not be getting Lewis and Clark water. The molecules wouldn't be Lewis and Clark water. You'd still be a member. Essentially, it'd be freeing up capacity in Big Sioux's system somewhere in the south so they can produce or give you more water from their system to the north. Another option we've talked about is potentially holding off on building the Worthington and Sibley service lines. If we can get water to Lincoln Pipestone Rural Water, that's roughly 12 miles from Worthington. There might be a way that Lincoln Pipestone could get more water to Worthington in the short term, and Sibley might just have to wait. Those combined, we might be able to get that 160 down to $125 million, which would keep the feds on the hook for the roughly 65 million. So one of the things we're talking about is possibly, I want to make sure I don't, I'll save that. I was going to make a point that's on the next page. So many financing options have been discussed. All I'm doing here is taking two options that seem to have the most support, and I'm cherry picking them and putting them together. So this, I don't want to give you the impression is a proposal, rather it's ideas that have been talked about amongst the board that seem to have either, I would say, the most support or at least the fewest objections. One is, once the water arrives, instead of $2.12, that's the current rate you're paying, the connected members are paying $2.12 per 1,000 gallons for the first 25% of their capacity. We estimate when everyone's connected, the water will be roughly 50 cents cheaper because you have all the members paying to run the plant instead of right now it's 11 members paying the full freight to operate that plant. One suggestion that's been made is to keep the water rate at $2.12 and then use that extra 50 cents to finance debt. And obviously the $2.12 will change over the years with inflation, but the bottom line is you essentially have 50 cents more in there that you could use for debt service. And couple that with another idea that's been brought up, and that is adding a monthly meter charge for 40 years with proceeds used to provide debt service for construction. If every member put on a meter surcharge of $2.80 per month, that would be enough, along with the water sales, to service about $160 million worth of debt. That's if we got a zero interest 40-year loan. The idea that's been talked about is, because you're saying, what bank give you that, because you want to go there, is the idea, we don't know if it's even possible yet, is to approach the federal government about converting a portion of our grant dollars into a zero interest 40-year loan. The thinking being they're on the hook right now for grant dollars, and we would approach them saying, look, you guys are leaving us holding the bag, can you at least do this for us, where you convert these grant dollars, at least some of them, into a zero interest 40-year loan. So on the face of it, you may say, geez, why would they ever give you a zero interest 40-year loan? What we'd be selling them is they're off the hook then for that grant. Instead of grant, it's now in the account receivable column. Now, if we went for the $125 million option where you did some creative things, instead of the 160, you'd be looking at 125, then the meter charge would be approximately $1.93 per meter per month, plus the 50 cents on the water sales. So those are some things that we're talking about. In terms of the argument I just touched on, why would they even consider a zero interest loan? It would take legislation, and it would not be easy, which again, because of the retirements of Senator Johnson, Senator Harkin, if we are gonna pursue legislation, it really needs to be this year, because it could take a full year, 2 years to get this passed. the worst thing I believe that could happen is to say, let's not do anything this year, but come spring of 2014, let's revisit this. And then if you decide then to pursue legislation, to me, you're starting way too late. And so if we're gonna pursue legislation, in my opinion, and the opinion of some of the other directors, you gotta pull the trigger now. Either decide not to do it at all, or do it now. Also, in general, on the federal level, one of the things to talk about what now, is there a willingness by the members and their customers to get tougher with Congress and the administration? If there's no grassroots outrage, that equals no action. And I think Madison is one community where Mayor to kind of set the bar. Anytime any of our elected officials have been in town, Mayor Royce or Mayor Jean were always making sure that whether it was the senators or representative was hearing how important it is to get Lewis and Clark funding. So certainly urge you to continue that tradition. But how badly, when they're in Sioux Falls or if they're in Parker, some of those connected members, how much outrage are elected officials hearing? And so, we're talking about potentially communities spending a lot more money for this project. Hopefully that makes you mad. It makes us mad. And hopefully those elected officials hear how angry you are. Kind of insult to injuries, the non-connected members have been forced to spend additional money on infrastructure. Right now, it's about $11 million that the non-connected members have spent or will be spending this summer. An example is the city of Hull is spending $1.5 million this summer on infrastructure they did not plan to build. The city of Sheldon is spending $350,000. So the bad news is that's, again, money that they did not plan to spend, but on the flip side, it's buying them time. So someone like Sheldon, I don't know this to be the case, but they may come back and say, you know what, because we were forced to spend this money, we're okay waiting 10 years versus putting on this surcharge and paying more for the water. Right now, it appears that the most urgent water needs are among the Minnesota members, in particular Worthington, but also Laverne and Lincoln Pipestone. Right now, that seems to be the big push. With Madison, I'm looking forward to hearing tonight how urgently you feel you need the water. There have been discussions among the Minnesota members, Governor Dayton and the Minnesota congressional delegation on how to get water to the Minnesota members. So right now, there's kind of this, at least preliminarily, looking at what I would call individual state solutions. And kind of the Minnesotans are getting together and talking about, well, what do we need to do amongst ourselves to take the bull by the horns? So before we get too far down that individual state solution route, our chairman has called a meeting for this Thursday in Laverne that Chad will be at, to see if the non-connected members can reach an agreement on how to proceed. Because right now, and you probably read some of the articles in the Argus, there's been some straw polls taken, and the non-connected members don't even agree how to proceed. So right now, the connected members are they're scot-free right now. They're not forced to make any decisions because the non-connected members don't even agree. And so that's the purpose of this meeting in Laverne. And your feedback tonight would be helpful is what is the lowest common denominator that all the non-connected members can agree upon, so that we can take some proposal to the connected members. The straw poll I referred to was in regard to borrowing $100 million, and that was roughly a 50-50 split. But that was before talking about a way to pair the water rates with the surcharges. Even though the $125 million is more than 100, is it packaged in a way that would make it more palatable? Bottom line, how much more, if any, are the members willing to pay versus continuing the wait and see, or i.e. long-term investment strategy? What is Madison's position? Feedback, questions, or comments? I know I'm not going to give you any final answers tonight, but I'm hoping to get just some discussion going amongst yourselves. And you're obviously, people like Fred and Chad have a lot of input into this, but it really comes down to Do you wanna pay more for the water to get it sooner than whenever? Or are you okay with just whenever?
Well, from the readings and that I've done, and the, discussions and that I've done just to try to learn a little bit about this, we're gonna need the water down the road. And actually, the sooner, the better. But we have a water quality issue, and Lewis and Clark would help us solve that. So, from what I've seen, we're gonna be spending money one way or the other, to try to improve our situation. And right now, from what I've heard, in that we aren't running dry. But the question is when will be?
You hit it on the head, Mr. Mayor, that you don't know when another drought could hit, how that's gonna impact your aquifer and your water quality, but also, in the past, we've talked about economic development in Madison. One big industry comes in, you could be looking at your water situation much differently than you are today. I know in the past, the previous mayor who's been on the TV talking about economic development with one arm tied behind your back. How many businesses are not even calling Madison because they know you have enough water, but yeah, the water quality's not so great. How many opportunities are being missed because they're not even picking up the phone? We'll never know that, but, so yeah, it's kind of, it's water quality, it's economic development, it's all that tied together. And you may say, kind of what you're saying, I think, Mayor, is you may say, right now, you're fine for the next 3-4 years, and I could be here next year, and you guys could all be singing a different tune because circumstances have changed. The one thing I did put in the presentation is if money were no object and we had the money right now, it would take 5 years to complete the project. So, and Madison's basically, at the end.
Tail end.
And so, if a decision is made on how to proceed that allows us to move forward, we still have 5 years. So if we wait 3 years, then decide to do something, we're at 8 years. So just remember, whenever a decision is made to move forward, you gotta add 5 years. And that's if money is no object.
One thing maybe I'd like to comment on, and Dave actually has a lot of background on this as well, but about in the mid-90s, Madison commissioned Banner to accomplish some studies, to study some different alternatives for our water supply. I think a big part of that was a sulfate rule that was being proposed by EPA, a water quality issue. And that study talked about several different options that Madison had to try to look into addressing this issue. At the end of the day, it did recommend that Lewis and Clark be the alternative to pursue. Subsequently, that sulfate rule went away, but we were a member of Lewis and Clark, and so there's other different water quality issues that we are continually monitoring and trying to address and deal with. As Troy mentioned, quantity. There was a few wells drilled after that report in the mid-90s, but I might venture to say that that's not our long-term best solution. I still believe that Lewis and Clark is our long-term best solution. However, revisiting a study, or we don't know all the answers. When it gets down to, Troy asked the question, how much are we willing to pay? That's a hard question to answer unless you know what alternative B, C, D, and E are. And so maybe come back full circle and say, before we pull the trigger or look on that, what are the ramifications? I do believe that, we started down this path. It's a good source of water. It's quality water. There may be, a wheeling thing with Big Sioux and other things we can do to be a party to it, but I think it's a good long-term solution. So I just thought I'd submit that for some of you may or may not have been aware of some of that,
Yeah.
that history.
Having said that then, Chad, Troy, okay, I'm focused just on Madison. I agree, let's, partner up with everybody and do what we can. if we were to sit here today and say, I tell you what, Troy, we're gonna pay for all of this on our own. Okay, what would it cost to connect us in 5 years? Madison. I mean, is it 50 million, 100 million, 2 billion?
Well, that would be the to connect it as we currently envision would be the 160 million roughly.
Just for Madison?
No, that's not. Just
That's-
Madison.
no, just Madison.
About
$30 million,
About 30?
26, 27, last I heard.
27 to 30, depending on how much inflation happens. between
Yeah.
now and when you guys
Yeah.
build it. Yeah.
I see what you're
Okay.
saying, yeah, if we,
Yeah.
just what does it cost to do the Madison line as we envision? I've heard as high as 30, as low as about 26 million. And then if we did this wheeling idea, that saves about 10 million from that idea.
If we ever, I know there's been some questions on, say we go forward and borrow $100 million, does that fall back into our debt limit caps?
For the
If that's the
city?
case, it's kind of a no-brainer at this point.
Yeah,
We don't have,
yeah, it's
we
not
don't have the
our
debt
hand.
limits to
Well, but
go
the-
down that road.
but the
And we
100 mil-
won't for some time.
But the 100 million is over.
$5 million.
No,
would
but
be
it's over
earned.
everybody, right?
No, but 5 million would be our cut. Out of 20 members, we don't have $5 million. We don't have $1 million worth of cap space.
The feedback from our attorney is since Lewis and Clark would be borrowing the money and then generating the revenue from water sales, that it would not impact your debt limit. If you were actually signing on to say, this 5 million is our share, then it would be different. Then he said it would count. Now, obviously, before we get too far down the road, you'd want your attorney to look at that as well. But that's the feedback from our attorney, is if Lewis and Clark incurs the debt, then it would not count toward your debt limit. Because you're right, then we were just wasting our breath talking about these ideas if you don't even have the option to pursue it. And you know, again, back to Scott, and I know he wields a lot of power there in Pierce, thank you for being here, Scott, is, you know, if we have to do something on our own because the federal government is not doing their share, you know, one of the things the members have talked about is certainly going to the respective states to at least join in an equal share of that debt. That if, you know, hypothetically, the members had to put up another 50 million or whatever the number that the states combined would do, you know, an equal amount. Because up until now, the cost of the state, from the states and the local members has been the same. It was an 80-10-10 split. And obviously, we would want to go back to the legislatures and say, hey, we don't want to be back here, but you know the story. The federal government is forcing us to come back and ask. So we don't want to go back to Pier and ask for more money, but that certainly could be an option depending on what the members decide to do. But if the members decide you don't want to pursue the $160 million or whatever the number is, 125, then there's nothing to discuss with our legislators. One thing just to mention on the 100 million, that was the straw poll. At that time, we were just throwing out a number, and we also threw out 150 million and 200. They were random numbers to find out, is there a debt servicing level that the members would feel more comfortable with? It was kind of like, okay, you're not willing to buy the car for this much, would you buy it for this, would you buy it for this? One of our directors said it sounds like a timeshare deal here. And so that was the basis for 100. Right now, we do not see a scenario at this point where the 100 would get us to the end. The lowest we think we can get it at this point is about the 125.
Do you see a scenario anywhere where the 11 communities that are already connected are going to approve paying all this extra money for the 9 that aren't?
Two is, that's where you get into
I
the
mean,
bidding.
you're looking at a 50, 55-45 deal there that they're not
Yeah.
gonna pay. Why would they? They have our money.
Right, and surprisingly though, there's a lot of positive feedback from the members. Yes, there's been some members you've read about in the paper that have said, hey, we'll drop out before we do that, which I don't think is the case. But there's been feedback from members like Beersford, from Parker, from Lennox, that have been that's been favorable in terms of continuing to work together to try to figure out a way to connect the members. And number one, because it's the right thing to do, because they are using all the money from the outlying members to get water right now. If it wasn't for the prepayment by the outlying members and the states, we would not be serving water right now. So they get that. But there's a limit to how much they're willing to do, and that gets to the price tag, you know, and just use Sioux Falls as an example. You know, how much they're willing to help, I think, has to do a lot with what are you asking of us? Because kind of, you know, I think Chad said it best at one of our meetings, the connected members did not do this to the outlying members, it's the federal government. And the connected members want to help to a certain degree, and what is that certain degree? Obviously, they're gonna weigh the extra cost, it's gonna cost Sioux Falls $500,000 a year. We know that, okay, well, presumably they'd be willing to spend at least that, and to what degree more would they pay?
What, do you know what the investment of the unconnected members is at this point?
If we were to say to everyone, you get your money back, that states and local members, the project is done right now, here's your money back. Going from memory here was roughly $24 million that would need to be repaid by the connected members. But then they would get the capacity, so it's not like they're getting.
But they'd also still keep the bill for the infrastructure.
Correct.
Which meaning that 50 cents would never go away.
That would never
Plus,
go
they'd
away.
have to come up with, they'd have to take out a loan for $24 million, because I don't think that's sitting in the bank anywhere. So, one way or another, they're gonna pay quite a bit, whether we cut bait now or move forward.
Which is why I believe they are willing to help to agree. They're gonna weigh, okay, here's what we have to pay anyway. I think they're gonna look at it, we're on the hook for this regardless, and you're asking us to do this. You know, if they're roughly the same, I can see most of them say, yeah, you know, let's do it. Even some, I think, would do it if it's more, just because it's the right thing to do. But every member is gonna have their own tipping point where they said, no, I'm not willing to do that.
You know, and I think they're smart enough, they understand. I mean, it's not like it's something that we did that, you know, we didn't mismanage, you know, anything. It was, we were staying the course of it. It's from a federal government perspective, and
Very true. So this is some good discussion to have amongst yourselves. I do agree with Chad's analysis. It's hard for you to say, okay, we're gonna pursue this or that without you also weighing, okay, well, what's plan B, C, and D? It's not plan A, there's 26 or 25 other letters in the alphabet. You know, how many of those do you look at before you decide, oh, yeah, we can do this? The challenge is for us, you know, you're not the only one that needs to look at all the different plans before you decide, do you wanna spend X amount of dollars? The challenge is, it's now May, and if we wait another few months to see how things are going, pretty soon you're at the August recess, and then they have September and October that they're in session, then they're out. They don't meet very often, and so, you know, our timeline to pursue this zero interest idea, if we go that route, is pretty narrow, because we have looked at conventional financing, and obviously the numbers just go crazy once you start adding, you know, 5-6% interest to any kind of loan, and that's if we're lucky, if we got 5 or 6%.
Is there historically anything else that's been done like this with a long-term 0% loan of this magnitude?
Do you know
That's
any-
not outside the country?
Not in water systems, but the original rural electrics were built that way.
No, we've always been, actually, the original rural electrics were 2%, the prevailing interest rate was 1% at that time. So we're paying 100% more of it, and we've done it all with loans.
But you've done it all with loans, right?
No grants at all.
Yeah.
It does seem counterintuitive to loan somebody 0% interest when, with the deficit, you're paying much higher than the federal government is, so. In the long run, I don't know, that's a great investment for the US citizens to be borrowing money from other countries and then lending it to
Yeah.
their citizens at 0%, so that might be a little hard to stomach.
One of the options we looked at is, we have been told we can use future federal funds to repay principal on a conventional loan, but not the interest. So one of the scenarios we looked at is, well, what if we borrowed $200 million, and all we did as members is service the interest for 40 years? We don't make any principal payment, we use the federal funding, presumably get enough each year to make the principal payment. We thought, and the theory being then that the federal government's feet is still held to the fire for that $200 million, and all we're doing is paying the interest. Well, much to our surprise, when you run the amortization schedule, at 5% for 40 years, the interest alone is $263 million. We'd be paying more in interest than the principal just to keep the federal government's feet to the fire. So that's when we went to the zero interest loan idea. But we don't even know, you're right, I want to stress, this is just a concept. We have had discussions with our congressional folks, but they have in no way said, yes, we can do this. This is just conceptual. So we may all get on board and say, yep, full speed ahead, let's try to do this 125 or 160 million idea, and we may find out it's dead on arrival because of the reasons you just shared. But we gotta start somewhere. So is that enough to think about?
That's quite a bit to think
All
about. But, you know, in the other side of the coin too is that, you know, we're in a situation where our wells are in the same aquifer currently, and if we should have a chemical spill or something that, you know, hampered that, you know, that could put us in a world of hurt, you know, and so, you know, how much is it gonna cost us to go out into another aquifer and you know, bring that water in, you know, from a different source, and so we're in need of better quality water. The question is what's it gonna cost us, how long is it gonna take, and where is it gonna come from? You
Well
know,
said,
so,
well said. And the community of Worthington has said, we have no other options. We will pay what it takes to get water. And water is becoming more and more expensive. Their neighbor to the east, Fairmont, just built a new treatment plant, and their water rates are through the roof in Fairmont. We ran some analysis on, or not ran analysis, but we got some feedback on what the water rates are in Kansas. And that was in an earlier presentation. And it's quite a bit higher than what the water rates are around South Dakota. So what we think is a high water rate now could look dirt cheap 10, 20 years from now, much like gas. I remember being shocked when I saw out in Hill City, I just remember distinctively, gas was up to $1.80, and I just could not believe it. And it just was seared into my memory, like, oh my goodness, well now, geez, you know, we'd fill up every container we possibly could. So, you know, challenge is making decisions now, and how are we gonna look back at them 10 years from now, or 20 years from now? You know, you talk about reliability, the Missouri River is as reliable a source as we have available. And the quality, the people that have gotten the water, like the Centervilles of the world, oh my goodness, they just love the water. Water softeners, they're not too popular with the Culligan people, because water softeners are being jettisoned. The quality has just been amazing. And so you get what you pay for, and I think that was one of the comments by Don Sweeter, the manager of South Lincoln Rural Water, that, man, this is worth it. It's worth it to pay for this water, the reliability and the quality. I've taken enough of your time.
and that's, you know, that's what we need too, is reliability and quality.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other discussion at this point, or are we ready
Well,
to?
you know, I'd like to just look at what this really was gonna cost the community of Madison. I'd like to put some numbers together on, you know, what our water usage is and what the 50 cents per thousand would be over a 40-year time, as well as 40 years worth of $2.50 meter charges. I mean, it may, you know, that number may say, hey, we can do a lot of things with this, or it might say, heck yes, for this investment to get that, it's cheap for us. So I think these are the kinds of things we need to look at and see what really our cost is. I know we've got 1.9 invested, and I'm not a big fan of borrowing money. But if there's a way to do it where we can pay it back and still get a good deal for it, I'm for that. But I think that's what we really gotta look at and see, how much is this really gonna cost our citizens?
Well, even for that factor though, if they do have a way that it doesn't count against our cap or borrowing limit, it's still money that we've borrowed. And
And
because
we owe.
because it doesn't show up on there, doesn't mean that the next time we do try and go for cap money, that it's not gonna be figured into that new bond rating.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Just
It's
because
still-
it doesn't count on one number doesn't mean it's not there, and it's not gonna prohibit something else.
For 40 years.
Yeah.
I mean, we gotta look at all the pieces. I mean, obviously, we need a good source of water, but we also need to make sure that 5 years down the road, signing off on something like this doesn't exclude us from the net, I mean, because this isn't our only issue. There's always something else. You know, streets are collapsing, or, you know, the wastewater, or a water plant, or, there's always a fire. Every year that I've been on, there's been a fire. And we just don't want to back ourselves into such a corner, and we have to a certain degree by using all of our debt limit except for, what, a couple $100,000? I mean, right now, we would have to get creative if we had an emergency. We'd have to find some, at the end, we just have to tax our citizens more to get ourselves out of trouble. I mean, that's really the way to do it. If you call it a surcharge or whatever it is, it's still a fee. To add another 5 million or whatever we'd be assessed for this is something we have to factor, because at some point, just like at home, apparently the federal government is the only entity that doesn't have to monitor this. You can only borrow so much money, because you don't have enough coming in to pay the bills or to pay the interest payments, so.
Well, and the other thing is, too, is, as he pointed out, and that the members that are not connected have to agree, and he said right now they're not. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, what comes out of
Well, at a
that-
certain dollar
out of that
amount, they will
Thursday
agree,
meeting.
because they're gonna have to come up with 24 million plus pretty much 50 cents per thousand for the rest of
Well,
our
that-
lives. So that's,
That's the connected members.
yeah,
No, what he was saying too is
Oh, yes.
the non-connected members haven't come up with an agreement yet either. And that's what that meeting is Thursday, and it'll be interesting to see, you know, what materializes there, if anything, too.
I think you're gonna see a very diverse, and Chad could speak to that because he's on the board, but, I mean, he talks about Worthington in a world of hurt.
And
We're
LaBelle.
we're not there.
Yeah, we're not
We're
there.
not there. And I mean, and I'm a big fan of, I guess I was always a big fan of hedging our bet by being in Lewis and Clark for potential water, but the question is at what cost? And I think Chad made the point, and I commend him for doing that, because I know he's a big fan of the project, because he's, you know, been heavily invested in it, but I think you have to weigh the other options that are out there as opposed to that Lewis and Clark option. And we need to see what that is. I understand they want an answer, but we're not gonna give an answer on Thursday, and that's not gonna happen. So, and I don't expect that they want that, but if what we're gonna say, we want water tomorrow, they know what they've gotta do. We, on the other hand, have other things that we might be able to do. that
Well, and then as I
Dave can
was-
help us with some of those solutions, too.
As I was to understand too, in some of the discussions, and that Minnesota is to the point where the governor's getting involved, and the state is willing to put some money forward, you know, for their end of the project too, and we don't know any of that from this side.
There's no question that, you know, in the future, I mean, water's gonna be, and obviously, a liquid gold. And the more you're invested in the game, and the more you have, I guess, got options versus one option, that's a better thing. But we need to, at what cost again, and maybe there's some options that give us multiple options closer than Lewis and Clark, and that's another thing we need to look at. I mean, it's too bad, it's a great project, but when you look at the map, we are
The tail end.
we're the end of the line, boys.
33
You gotta wanna go
miles.
there,
33 miles left to go is what he was saying.
yeah. At
With
26
nobody
to
else on
30
the
million.
line.
Yeah, with nobody else,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Should have pretty good pressure now.
So,
So the backhoe hits it.
Yeah.
all right, any other further discussion? And I don't believe this, is this anything we need to make a motion or do anything with right now? It's just, you know, information for us and for the public who are watching. The next item here is an acknowledgement of a letter from the city of Sioux Falls thanking for the assistance during their ice storm. And we had people from Madison and that were down there helping their crews remove branches and getting down power lines back up and operating and that for their citizens to get them back online. So is there anyone that has any questions or comments on that?
Just so the commission knows, Dennis always contacts me as the utilities commissioner, electric commissioner, and gives me a heads up that this can happen. I always make sure that we talk to David a little bit, make sure that we're good with our insurance and when they get out of town, and we dot all the i's, cross all the t's on that. And obviously, it's the old thing that if it happens to us, we hope they remember is
Reciprocate.
which they hope.
Did we have an agreement with Sioux Falls, or is that one we just dealt with at the time? I know with Flander and some communities we have agreements with.
Right. Mutual agreement.
Yeah.
There's no more.
Yeah, we have one with Sioux Falls.
I don't know.
I don't know that we do. I think it's just kind of
We just-
unwritten policy.
We
that-
just took care, I mean, it's still, it's probably falls under this, basically the same guidelines, we just
Right.
didn't have it pre-signed.
Yeah.
And
Just
then
so-
acknowledge.
I just want to mention, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I just
No,
want to mention
very
that so
good.
that you didn't think that they just ran off there
Yes.
on their own. But, you know, maybe they
Yeah.
want to, I don't know, but
Yeah.
Dennis did call me.
Yeah,
So-
no, very well, very understood. And then we also have the April building permit report, which is attached. So,
Motion to acknowledge the April building permit report.
Second.
okay, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
All right,
Alright,
Okay, motion carried.
Did we need to acknowledge that letter for
You want
anything,
to?
like the mutual aid agreement?
If we're going to acknowledge number 4, I think we should probably acknowledge number 3 as well. So if there's a motion to acknowledge a letter from the city of Sioux Falls,
So moved.
second,
okay, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
all right.
alright.
Motion carried. There being no old business listed, under new business, and that, we have Mr. Oden here, and that if we can have him speak, would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Just a quick report on bid opening on the water treatment plant improvements. The bids were read on April 24. I believe you all have received the letter. Looks like this that summarizes the bids. There were 5 different bids read. There's one bid submitted that was not read, and the reason it was not read is they didn't include bid security of sufficient amount, so we just didn't read the bid. The low bid was submitted by PKG Contracting. If you combine bid schedules 1 and 2, bid schedule 1 is the improvements at the treatment plant. Bid schedule 2 is the 1 million gallon storage tank.
Mhm.
And we really only had one, separate bid for that, because we didn't read a lot of them. But the low bid was submitted by PKG Contracting. We have worked with them on a lot of projects. They're a very well qualified contractor. They're ready to do the work. Our recommendation would be to award Schedules 1 and 2 as a combined bid to PKG Contracting, and award bid alternate number 1. Bid alternate number 1 is the demolition of the old underground clear well. That's the one that's been giving problems. And when we put an estimate together to do that, we estimated the cost to be at $200,000. And their bid's at 75. And the reason it is that much below our estimate is they would have had to bring in a lot of material from off-site in order to fill that hole. And there will be extra material from the construction of the new one. And so they can save a lot of money if they can just move the extra material from the construction of the new one into the hole.
And keep it on site.
And keep it on
Yeah.
site, not.
One hole with the other?
And so, it all makes good sense, but.
It does.
We put it together with the alternate because we knew we had a tight budget. We didn't wanna be in a situation where you couldn't award a bid, so. If you do award the combined bid and bid alternate 1, you will, in your overall budget, you will not have a lot of money left for contingencies. And when you're working on a project site, keeping the plant running, something that we didn't think about will come up. That's virtually guaranteed. Something will come up, but we still believe that this is the best approach, the best use of your funds. So that's our recommendation. Any questions?
If I may also add, Dave covered it very well. Fred and I were at the bid opening also and talked about this, and also with Jen. There is not much left with the contingency. This project is within within the budget with the award of the bids. However, due to the increase in the scope of the project, which is primarily to replace the raw water lines on site. You may recall, we talked about that when Banner, we went through that contract. There was a break last spring, it was a pretty significant break. That, replacing all those raw water lines were not in the scope at that time. That was added to the scope. It was a no-brainer to do that at the time. That's what made this so close, so to speak, in the bid prices. Despite that, the project, without accounting for contingency, is within the prices. So we think we got good bids. What I'm trying to say is I think we got good bids. However, an alternate could be that you reject bid alternate one, and which was for $75,000. And then that would be your part of your contingency funds. Essentially, there's about $10,000 to $20,000 in contingency right now if you would award bid alternate one, which is the demo of the Clearwell. But if you're not comfortable with that, you could reject that bid alternate one. And the concept is that would have to be done later. Next year, the following year, whatever, it'll probably have to be budgeted for and done later. And as David mentioned, it's very likely the costs would be, well in excess of that. So you may ask, okay, where's our contingency gonna come from if we award bid alternate one, or the demolition of the Clearwell? Fred and Jen and I had talked, there's some reserves that would have to likely be utilized should those change orders exceed this contingency, which it's not unreasonable that it's anticipated they will. However, Banner had some good things to say about PKG. I think some staff at Banner mentioned the industry standard for change orders is 3 to 5%. However, with their comfort level of PKG, with their what they've indicated, the thoroughness that PKG went through the site, visited with Fred's staff, they feel very comfortable that'd be well below the 3%, which just rough numbers, is $90,000. So it's reasonable that you could expect change orders and the reserve could be utilized anywhere in the range from $40,000 to $100,000. So I just want you to be aware of that before you consider awarding that bid alternate. The others, however, if you wait, it may cost you from those same reserves $100 to $200 to do that later on. So
We could get the engineering
Yeah.
department probably to fill that clear well in. Pay a little overtime, they could
Just
pull
buy
some
some-
gravel and
buy
make
some
some
shovels.
There you go.
I don't think we're gonna get that clear well filled in for $75,000 anytime soon. So, to me, it would seem to be counterproductive not to do the bid alternative, recognizing that we are tight on the contingency.
It wasn't our intention to utilize the reserves, but some of those items.
Well,
that
let's
came
hope
out
that,
last
let's
spring.
hope that we don't, and let's
Well,
hope that we
yeah.
hold their feet to the fire.
Yes.
Even if we do, and we have to recoup those reserves next year at 75, say 75,000 rather than 200,000, I think it's a good use of the city's money just to move that around a little bit and save ourselves that chunk of change. I don't think that's being, I think that's being prudent, it's not wasteful, it's spending the money at the right time to take advantage of savings, and I think it's the right move.
I was yakking the whole time. I don't know, Fred or Jen, if you have any comments about that, because they're your reserves, Fred.
Oh, so true, so true.
It's easy to spend Fred's money.
Yeah.
He's good at that. The reserves we're talking about is the well treatment reserves. There's currently $210,000 in there. We had some other things that we were looking at, but this comes first and foremost. What Dave had said and Chad said, PKG is a really, really good contractor. I worked with those folks when I was out in Pier on a $10 million wastewater project. They are very thorough, and when they look at a job, they keep their change orders down to the bare minimum. And they have a good habit of talking with staff and kind of working together to come up with the right solution for any of those so they can work to keep those costs down. So I'm very comfortable with those folks.
Very comfortable with using the well treatment reserves, you know, to cover any contingency. You know, we are dealing with a small site, and you have a lot of equipment, a lot of things going on there. You know, with that clear well out of the way, it just kind of, it does enhance the project where they can, you know, take that part of the clear well out they need and then use that, the void to basically, you know, get rid of the dirt and things for the new dig on the new clear well. So it's real advantageous to get that done while we can, and the cost is right on that.
But they won't be able to take that clear well down until the new one's operational, correct?
Actually, they could probably take some of that. I think the idea was to take the roof and the columns out and take it down 6 foot, but I think the timing's gonna be on them, you know, when it's gonna fit into their schedule.
Realistically, they won't be able to. They'll have
But to operate the plant, it needs to be there.
Plan
Oh,
operating.
yeah, that's right.
Keep plan operating.
Yep.
We have to build the new pump station with its associated clear well before we can demolish it.
Yeah, absolutely right.
They'll be piling the product there and then moving the product in after they do.
There'll be a big pile of dirt
Big thing is
until they're
there'll-
done.
There'll be a pile of dirt on site.
Yeah.
They won't have to haul it off.
Yep.
It'll be there until they put it in the hole.
And they don't have to take their equipment and then bring it all back and
Right.
everything too, so
Right, right.
a lot of savings.
Yeah, there's a lot of savings.
The one thing I'd just like to clarify, that I think comment was made earlier, whether we had Lewis and Clark, this project would need to be done. This is a step after the water gets to us, so it doesn't matter where we get our water from. We still need this. We asked a lot of times if we could get rid of it, so we didn't have to spend the money on it, so it's just a needed component.
Thank you. That's,
Yeah,
we need to
good-
keep that in mind.
Good point.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we accept the recommendation and the bid of PKG Contracting, both the bid schedule and the bid alternative. And if I'm correct, is the combined bid $2,939,600? Is that correct?
That's the combined bid, not,
Uh,
to that, you have to add the 75,000.
And then the alternative of
The $3 million.
of the 75,000. So that's the $3,014,600?
Right.
Okay. That would be my motion, Mr. Mayor.
Okay,
Second.
do we have a second? Okay, we have a bid, we have a motion and a second to accept PKG Contracting's combined bid for the clear well and for the bid alternate number 1 to take care of the existing old well. Do we have any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
We'll get the contracts out and try to get a pre-con scheduled yet, maybe by the end of May.
Good.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then next item is first reading of ordinance 1544, repeal yard waste collection. And
Fred.
I'd ask Fred to address that if he would.
I will. This part of the ordinance deals with yard waste collection. Currently, there is this part of the ordinance says that customers can pay or sign up to have their yard waste picked up by our garbage collection folks on Wednesday. The fee is $30 a month. We've only had 30 customers. That $30 covers the entire year, which is 1 April to 1 October is the normal season, so you're looking at about 30 weeks that we pick up. Comes out to about 98 cents a customer per week to actually pick that up. The reason that I would like to get this repealed is that it actually costs us money to go around and pick up everybody's yard waste, 90 cents, 97 cents a pop. We can't hardly afford the gas or the fuel to go around and do this every week. There's only 30 customers. I think that's what it's been for quite a few years, at least that I've been here. So, and this year we actually have told utility billing and customers that we're no longer providing that service. We kind of slowed that down, so everyone's pretty much aware of the fact that this is one of those things we don't want to really do. So,
And they still have the free drop-off site.
yeah, we do
Yep.
provide a drop-off site east of town. I mean, they can go in there and drop their yard waste off. We take care of that. There's also compost there. They can come get free of charge. So there's other services and a better way to do this. The folks that have called in, we recommended that they contact a neighborhood kid that wants to make a buck or two, you know, to haul that out there for them or cut their grass, whoever's doing that. Everybody that has called, there's only been about 6 seem to be okay with that. So,
There is a place to take it, that's the main thing.
absolutely.
That, yes, there is a place to take it.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. So,
that's what we're asking on the repeal of this.
It's first reading, then we had a second, 2 weeks.
mhm. Okay, do we have a motion?
I would make a motion to approve first reading of ordinance number 1544 for the repeal of the yard waste collection, and set second reading for, what's the date?
20s.
May 20th
28th.
or 2 weeks?
Tuesday?
28th.
For May 28th.
Second.
We have a second? Okay, we have a motion to repeal the yard waste collection, this being the first reading, and a scheduled second reading on May 28th. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Resolution number 2013-16, determining zoning for an annexed territory. Chad, would you want to address that?
Yes, Your Honor, I can. What this resolution simply does is declares what the zoning districts will be on the territories recently annexed, included in the annexation resolution number 2013-9 and 2013-10, to comply with the zoning ordinance, but also to be responsive to the interests of the requesting petitioners for annexation.
And this is where the hospital is going to go,
The
for those in the
hospital-
audience that are watching this.
That's correct. The hospital will be zoned Highway Business District and have Gateway GT2 overlay district on it. And the Lot 3 of the Schultz edition will be zoned agricultural district. And I think one thing that I'm observing now, if it's possible to add the language ahead of the Lot 3 paragraph to also have the Gateway District applied to that as well. It's an oversight on my part that it's not in here, but in our comprehensive plan, that entire stretch on the south side of the bypass, which referred to as the bypass, 10th Street, should have that. So if
Is it just easier to bring this back next week corrected?
What's your time?
Well,
Are you up against it?
I believe it, that would be the, trying to think of when that other resolutions will become effective. We would like to have it approved before those are effective.
Those 90,
They're out quite a ways, aren't they?
those 90 days.
Those resolutions were approved on the 22nd.
Oh, sorry, you mean, okay,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
15th, I believe.
okay.
The 15th. So, I think if we just add that, I don't know if a resolution, you have to make a motion to amend what's been published. I think it might be better to do it now. But you'd simply be adding the language after agricultural district and also have the GT2 Gateway Overlay District applied. You'd add that language to that line.
You can pass the resolution as amended.
Now, there's a Lot 3 and a Lot 4 in that, isn't there, on,
Right.
for both sides?
Lot
And
4 is
are-
the hospital, Lot 3 would be the Schultz property, yep.
Okay, and then what's the one on the opposite side? Because there's an East Schultz property and a West Schultz property on that, right?
Yeah, the one on the east side of the hospital was not requested or
Was not
petitioned to
requested,
be
okay,
annexed,
okay.
so that's outside city
Yep,
limits.
I just wanted to make sure in that we've got everything covered there then.
Yeah.
So. Do we have a motion to approve with the amendments that Chad is proposing?
So moved.
Second? Did we have a second?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, any further discussion?
I just want to make sure, I'm reading Chad, it says that the following territory be incorporated into the Highway Business District and also have the G2 Gateway Overlay District applied. You only want the last part of that and only, starting with and also the G2?
I,
Or do you
that-
want that whole sentence moved
The
down?
paragraph above the legal description that has lot 4 on it,
Right.
I would like it as it reads there, as it
Right.
reads in this, in the agenda packet.
Right.
In the paragraph above the lot 3, I would like to have the language added behind the word district, and also have the GT2 Gateway Overlay District applied.
Okay, just that portion of it.
Correct.
Okay, all right, I just want to make sure it was clear. Yep, that's all I have. Mr.
Okay. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Resolution 2013-17, approving a replat. Again, Chad, I'd ask you to just give a brief description.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Included in the agenda packet is a document created on behalf of Charles Keppen for a replat within Shamirda's addition. It's parceling out a portion of property that he owns here. When it is a replat, it can bypass the planning commission in the interest of timing. That was changed in some of the regulations a couple years ago. I would recommend approval of this plat. We've added some language in the owner's certificate to deal with subdivision regulations, and if there's any further subdivision forthcoming in the future, which we don't anticipate. Mr. Keppen indicated there's not, so I would recommend approving as presented.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion and second to approve resolution number 2013-17, approving the replat. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Bills for approval and bills for ratification.
I make a motion to approve and ratify the bills.
Second.
All in favor, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Personnel actions. And on this one here, Fred, are these under yours?
No, sir, I don't think they are.
Okay.
Park.
These are all
Aquatic Center.
aquatic center, yeah.
Aquatic Center.
Okay.
Community Center.
Yep.
And-
I'll move the approval of the personnel as presented.
Second.
Okay. It's been motioned and seconded to approve the personnel changes and that. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and on here, we have an executive session. Joe, do we have a motion to adjourn the main meeting and go into executive session?
So move.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. We will now be going into executive session.